Hi, everyone, and welcome back to Systemic Conversations. I'm Carole.
I'm Orianne. And today's episode is going to be different. We are entering deep, emotional, and complex territory. We want to explore a geopolitical situation, the relationship between Israel and Palestine, through the lens of systemic work.
And we'd like to acknowledge that since preparing this episode, we've seen even more devastating developments. Israel's direct attacks on Iranian targets and escalating tensions, the silencing of the Freedom Flotilla activists, and Gaza's deepening blackout.
Rather than trying to chase the headlines, we want to offer something else, a deeper view. We are looking at the systemic patterns underneath the crisis: trauma, exclusion, guilt, and inherited roles. That's what we will be exploring today, and these new events only reinforce the urgency of this work.
And before we dive in, we'd like to give you a quick reminder of the drama triangle. We explored this drama triangle in our last episode. And so people who didn't watch this episode, just a reminder that it's a dynamic where people or systems get caught in roles of victim, persecutor, and rescuer. These roles can shift quickly and unconsciously, often keeping conflicts stuck and preventing real resolution.
Exactly, Carol. Today we will look at how these roles show up not just in families or relationships, but also on a collective level in national identities, historical trauma, and the legacy of exclusion. We will also bring a Germanist relationship to this dynamic and what it means to carry inherited guilt. Let's begin with the Shoah, the Holocaust, a trauma so vast that its imprint stretches far beyond the individuals who lived through it. In systemic constellation, we often see how trauma doesn't end with one generation. It ripples through the family system, often unconsciously.
Yes, the Jewish people carry this immense historical pain. For many in Israel, the trauma of the Holocaust lives on a kind of existential alert system. We must never again be vulnerable, never again be powerless. That's a survival stance. It's understandable and it's also systemic.
You know, when trauma isn't integrated, it distorts perception. It can create a fixed identity. In this case, that of the eternal victim. But as we know from the drama triangle, when we cling to the role of victim, it can easily flip. The fear of being persecuted becomes a justification to dominate, to control, to strike preemptively, becoming the perpetrator.
So, as we said before, we always think of the drama triangle as a victim, persecutor, rescuer, as something that plays out in relationship of teams. But here we really clearly see it as it operates at the level of nations.
Here, Israel may identify with the victim. That's part of its historical narrative. But in its treatment of Palestinians, many would say it's enacting the persecutor role. Meanwhile, parts of the international community rush in as rescuers, often without fully seeing the whole system. By example, the United States in particular has positioned itself as a global savior, stepping into the rescue role with unwavering support for Israel. But, in doing so, it can inadvertently take on the persecutor role, especially in the eyes of Palestinians, by reinforcing power imbalances and blocking paths to justice. From a systemic perspective, this kind of rescuing that excludes is not neutral. It becomes a form of entanglement that deepens conflict rather than resolving it.
And also, that's why we wanted to acknowledge the systemic role of Hamas and the role it plays in this triangle. In Israeli narratives and much of the Western media, Hamas is cast as the ultimate perpetrator. This allows the Israeli government to remain in the role of victim, even while committing actions that mirror persecution, bombing, starving, displacing. The narrative becomes Hamas is to blame, even when Israel controls the borders, blocks the aid, and risks the lives of its own hostages.
Systemically, this is a form of splitting. A trauma defense that externalizes all danger and refuses to look inward. When Israel refuses to acknowledge its own capacity to harm, the system freezes. Victims and perpetrators become locked in a repeating loop of justification and retaliation.
So, Orianne, what is the way out? From a systemic perspective, it's not about justifying one side, but stepping out of fixed roles. For Israel, it might mean grieving instead of projecting. For Palestinians, including those under or resisting Hamas, it may mean reclaiming agency from trauma without fueling further dehumanization. And for the international community, it means moving beyond blame and creating space where all pain can be witnessed and no one is reduced to a symbol of danger.
Yeah, Carole, also, rescuing can become performative or even violent in its own way, especially when it excludes one's group's pain in favor of another's. Which brings us to the question, who is seen and who is excluded? In systemic work, exclusion always creates turbulence. The parts of a system that ignored, denied, or rejected, they don't disappear. Hey, they intensify, they fight to be seen. That's true in families and it's true in geopolitics.
Yeah, that brings us to the Palestinian people. That they have carried the pain of displacement since the Nakba in 1948, the catastrophe that saw over 700,000 Palestinians lose their homes. This trauma isn't just historic, it continues across generations through occupation, statelessness, exile.
And this is where the drama triangle turns again. The international community once saw Palestinians through a more sympathetic lens, even as the people to be rescued. But over time, especially post 9/11 and more recently after the October 7th attacks by Hamas, the dominant Western narratives have increasingly cast Palestinians as the perpetrator, as dangerous or inherently violent. These events have deepened stigma, polarized perspectives, and made it even harder to distinguish between the action of a group and the identity of a people.
So they've gone from being victims to being seen as a threat and therefore excluded again. In constellation work, when a person or a group is cast out of the field, they become entangled. They force themselves back into visibility, often through escalation, protest, or violence. Not because they're wrong, but because they haven't been seen in their full humanity.
And again, systemically, every person, every people needs to be acknowledged. The grief, the rage, the longing for land, for dignity, for identity. Without that, we repeat again and again the pattern of silencing and splitting that created the wound in the first place.
And Oriane, I'd like to add another layer to this distortion, which is called projection. We've had Israeli officials accuse Palestinian society of militarizing the children, of raising the children to hate, of putting them in harm's way. But when we look systematically, we can ask what might be unacknowledged within the accuser. In Israel, children also grow up with military training. They're taught to see the other as a threat and are conscripted by law. What cannot be accepted within the self or the system is often projected onto the other. That is a fundamental systemic principle, and it fuels the conflicts further.
And you know what, Carol? And now, with the internet cut off and journalists blocked, Gaza is not only starving, it has been made invisible. And this refusal to look to see suffering fully doesn't just happen locally, it happens across the world in the way nations relate to their past and to each other. In constellation work, this kind of forced invisibility always increases systemic pressure. What is hidden comes back, often violently, to be seen.
And now we're seeing across Algeria, Egypt, Jordan, and other countries, we see massive marches towards Gaza, collective movement that echo a systemic truth. When exclusion reaches unbearable levels, the wider system moves. Not just governments, but people, communities, fields of conscience. These marches are a demand not only for justice, but for visibility.
Yeah, and you are part of those people, huh? Isn't it, Carol?
Yes, yes.
You go for that, and you are part of March. Yeah, and some of those who try to help, journalists, humanitarians, even everyday people like you or me, are being detained and deported. Fortunately, we haven't been detained and deported, so we are able to do
Speak
this
freely today.
conversation. Egypt, in particular, plays a tense and ambiguous role. But yeah, bordering Gaza, controlling access, and acting both as gatekeeper and silent witness. In systemic terms, when someone stands at the border between life and death, silence becomes a powerful and dangerous position. The one who could help but doesn't become entangled in the system's pain.
Yeah, and we've seen Israel begin direct attacks on Iranian sites and diplomats, further widening the fields of this already entangled conflict. Like the trauma of displacement in Palestine, the pain doesn't stay local, it spreads. More actors are pulled in to embody the roles of persecutors or scapegoats, as if the system is looking for a place to release what cannot be metabolized.
Yeah, this pattern of distortion and loyalty also extends to global actors, and Germany is a particularly powerful example of how inherited guilt can crystallize into rigid loyalty, even at the cost of excluding others.
Yeah, as a country, we all know Germany carries enormous historical guilt from the Holocaust, and rightly so. But guilt, as that is not integrated, can become blind loyalty to the victims.
And I like to make a link with family constellation. We often see children or grandchildren or perpetrators over identify with victims. It's a way to compensate, to say, you know what, I'm not like them. But this can turn into rigidity, into moral inflexibility.
Yeah, and I've got a good example of that. It showed up today in how Germany often defends Israel at all costs, even when human rights violations are taking place. A recent example is Berlin naming Tel Aviv as its cultural partner city for 2025. a decision that has been widely criticized given the current humanitarian crisis in Gaza. From a systemic lens, such gestures can be seen as a continuation of inherited loyalty, a symbolic reaffirmation of Germany's post-Holocaust vow, but they also risk reinforcing exclusion by refusing to acknowledge the pain of others in the same system. It's as if criticizing Israel threatens that sacred contract that they have with them. We will never again betray you.
Wow. But this loyalty, however well intended, can become a form of blindness. It excludes others. It repeats again and again the systemic pattern, seeing only some, denying others. So before we move to healing, we want to acknowledge the ways the system continues to react, not just through governments, but through people, protesters, aid workers, neighboring nations. All are being pulled into this field and some are being silenced.
So we have to say, many of us watching this war unfold, well, some people don't call it a war, unfold, we feel powerless. We see children shot while collecting flour. We hear of people starving while aid is blocked. And we cannot help but think of the images from the past, from the Warsaw Ghetto, from the camps, from the silence of those who live nearby. The film, if you've not watched it, is very a powerful example. It's called The Zone of Interest. It reminds us of this chilling reality, how ordinary life can continue, even flourish, just next to unspeakable suffering, how denial and distance allow horror to repeat itself. So if you're watching this with us now or replay, you might feel heartbroken or frozen. You're not alone. From a systemic lens, witnessing matters. Silence has weight, but so does presence. To see, to feel, to not look away, that is already a refusal of the pattern.
Yeah, thank you for reminder us the importance to be a witness. So when enough of us stop turning away, the system shifts, and that is really powerful. It doesn't happen overnight, but presence is the first rupture in a long chain of inherited blindness. And we believe that remembering now, feeling now, and speaking now matters. When we dare to witness suffering, to feel its weight without turning away, that alone begins to shift the field. Presence interrupts the inherited cycle. And when enough people witness with courage, the system begins to shift slowly but surely, because silence is how it happened before.
Mm. So, where do we go from here? In systemic work, the first movement toward healing is to see what is, without defense, without projection, to acknowledge every member of the system, including those we've labeled enemy or wrong or dangerous.
Yeah, peace isn't about who is right, even though so many people think that is the way. It's about who is included. When every story is allowed to be heard, Israeli, Palestinian, German, Jewish, Muslim, then we begin to loosen the knots that entangle us.
Hmm. Yeah, that reminds me of the film. Gosh, forgot the title. Something with nation, where you have the Jewish and the Palestinian become friend and speak, about settlers and no other land. That's the title. Win the Oscar of the best foreign film documentary. It's
Oh,
very powerful. You see them sharing and witnessing and seeing each other. That's very powerful. I would recommend this documentary to anyone. So
mm,
it's very humbling because we realize we're all capable of every role in the triangle: victim, perpetrator, rescuer. What matters is whether we stay stuck in one of them or find a way out.
And for Israel and Palestine, that way out might mean recognizing that both peoples carry profound trauma and also agency. It means acknowledging one another's humanity and grief without reducing the other to a role or a symbol.
Yeah, Orianne, and it might mean daring to shift the narratives from who is to blame to what has been inherited, from defending territory to acknowledging pain, from repeating history to consciously choosing another path.
And for all of us watching, individuals, communities, nations, it asks, what am I excluding? What loyalties am I unconsciously carrying? What would it take to see the whole picture?
Yeah, it's true. When I have conversation with some people, you can see that they just want to be loyal to one side and don't want to see the other side. So seeing the big picture is very vital. Thank you, Orianne, for that. So as you see, systemic heal starts when someone, anyone, chooses to stop reacting and starts witnessing. That is the seed of transformation.
It means daring to feel what has been passed down to us and to let it move through rather than act it out.
Oh, thank you for this topic today. Thanks for walking this path with us today. We know it's a very charged topic, but we trust that our listeners, like us, are willing to sit with complexity and look deeper.
And we invite you to reflect, where do I see these dynamics in myself, in my family, in the stories I carry? What is mine to heal? This is the best way to support our uh, friends, Palestinian, Israelian, because I know many Israelian, they are suffering from this situation also. This is not,
Yes.
it's
Yeah.
really something hurt, that hurt the humanity.
So, what might shift in the world is if we each committed to including what's been excluded and stepping out of inherited roles.
For nations like Israel and Palestine to begin stepping out of the drama triangle, it requires a collective move from reactivity to responsibility, from roles rooted in trauma like victim or persecutor toward adult to adult dialogue, mutual recognition, and shared humanity.
Yes, powerful. It means acknowledging all pain without ranking it, seeing the other without erasing the self, and fostering leadership that isn't driven by inherited fear, but by the capacity to hold complexity.
And it also means creating safe spaces, cultural, political, even spiritual, where grief can be expressed, guilt can be metabolized, and listening becomes possible again.
We know it's not simple. A lot of people are polarized, but systemic work teaches us that healing becomes possible when everyone has a place and every truth can be spoken. Of course, this isn't over, and we'll keep watching, listening, and reflecting systematically. And we invite you to do the same, not by taking sides, but by seeing the whole. That's where the shift can begin.
Yeah, thank you. And before we close, just a note, after our last episode on forgiveness, many of you reached out with questions and reflection. Thank you. Thank you. That's amazing and it helped us. So some felt something was still missing. Yeah. And yeah, Carol.
Yeah. So in the next episode, we're taking the conversation deeper. We're more clarity, with more honesty and real life examples from our constellation work.
So if you want to know more about the drama triangle and all those games we are playing in our lives to survive, join us as we revisit forgiveness, not as an ideal, but as a choice or not.
Okay, so we'll see you there. Don't forget to subscribe, to comment, and to share with friends and family these podcasts.
Thank you for listening. If this conversation moved you, challenged you, or opened something, let us know. We would love to hear from you.
Until next time on Systemic Conversations.
Bye.
Bye bye.